Nathan, welcome back to He's Not Wrong. Thank you so much for joining us again today. Several weeks ago, we had you on and we were discussing all of the data and findings that the Truth Alliance have been finding as y'all really dive into the election data from 2024. And then you teased that there were some news and some things that were coming down the pipeline for the Election Truth Alliance, and that really has come out in the past week. So that's why I wanted to have you on. I believe there's a lawsuit that y'all filed in Pennsylvania, and I just want to go ahead and dive right in and ask you all about that lawsuit. So I want to give you the floor to discuss that.
Yes, thank you so much for having me again. I'll give you props. The last time we talked after that, everyone went from watching, at the time, I think I had an interview with David Packman to watching the interview with you. And they're like, I loved the interview with you because we got to actually kind of talk through things a little more back and forth, which is what we wanted. So thank you so much for having me last time. Excited to be
Absolutely.
back. Hopefully there'll be some more opportunities in the future. And yeah, so as you said, there was some major things made public. We do have a lawsuit filed in Pennsylvania. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we also have, and we've been working on this, and some of this has been made public. We've been doing on the ground investigations across the US. And one of the states we've made public is Florida. And we are building a lawsuit and, some litigation in Florida as well. I've been working with House and Green from It's Up to Us, and we've kind of been collaborating on looking at the systems used in Florida and the results and any concerns from some of the counties. So there will be some more of that information as we go forward, both Florida and Pennsylvania. So, okay, well, I will jump in. We'll keep this, super conversational. Actually, I'd love to
Sweet.
hear, what have you heard so far about the lawsuit? What are some of the big items if you've heard anything yet? If not, I'll kind of overview.
Yeah. I've heard some I heard some rumblings over the past few days on really mainly TikTok about the lawsuit that y'all filed in Pennsylvania. A lot of people seem to be excited about it, but I think the one thing that they were covering, it was really high level, saying, yes, finally the Truth Alliance, they're not just like studying the data, but they're filing lawsuits. But from a lot of the social media influencers, some of those political talking heads that I listen to really didn't get into what the end goal of what the lawsuit is, which is what I'm hoping we can discuss is what the lawsuit means, what can we expect, because that's something that I think was missing in a lot of that social media conversation. And I did see the filing, I did read it in advance of our conversation, so I think I have an idea of where this is going to go. Um, but I wanna approach this assuming that no one knows what that end goal is.
Yes. So we'll just go over kind of why and what, and then we'll go into a little bit of the what's in the lawsuit. So keep in
Perfect.
mind, when it comes to lawsuits, it's highly recommended you don't really talk about the lawsuit. So
Sure.
there's a fine line, and the way we talk about it is we pretty much just say what's in the lawsuit or the filing. It is public. Now we are going to put the lawsuit up on our website soon so people can go and actually read the initial filing, and then they can read kind of the summary and maybe look at other things as it progresses. So the point of the lawsuit, well, first and foremost, we have filed the lawsuit in the Western District of Pennsylvania in their Supreme Court. So it's not actually, it's a Supreme Court lawsuit for Pennsylvania specifically, and it's encompassing three counties, and that is Allegheny, Erie, and Cambria counties. So just the three of Pennsylvania. And the point of the lawsuit, and it's laid out pretty clearly at the beginning, is we're not seeking to change the outcome of election results. We are merely seeking to investigate and get a hand count in those three counties for the election day paper ballots. Well, not just the election day, but the paper ballots that were cast during the election. And we say that, and pretty much we go into detail explaining all of the concerns around what occurred during the election, why those warrant further investigation. And then we do talk about the statistical analysis. But in this case, it's not purely statistical analysis, it's election forensics. So that's where we, as you've seen before, we talk about the methodologies from different ways of visualizing the data, looking at turnout. So that's pretty much our ask is, if this lawsuit is successful, what is the end state? The end state is we get a hand count of the ballots in those counties. And then from there, we'll know if there were any significant differences from the digital reports to the physical ballots themselves. This lawsuit won't change the outcome of any elections. This lawsuit doesn't even accuse or target anyone of anything. It is merely a investigative lawsuit. And if there is to be, additional action, it will come after this lawsuit has run its course.
Who is that
Any
on? Is that
questions on that?
yeah, a lot actually. So if they say the Supreme Court for Pennsylvania, they say, you know what, yes, there's enough evidence, there's enough data here to warrant a hand recount of all the ballots in those 3 counties. Go through the process, they hand count all the ballots, and our worst fears are confirmed that there is a big difference between what we know and what that hand count just showed. And you said that once the lawsuit runs its course and then next steps will happen, who would that be on? Would y'all have to file another lawsuit? Is the state kind of, are we hoping that the politicians do the right thing because information's in front of them? Like how does it keep moving forward?
Yeah, there's honestly multiple ways it could go. We are hoping that the individuals and the government officials who's entrusted in protecting elections, they will then have the incentive and the knowledge to go on and do further investigations. That's kind of our push, is we're saying there are credible concerns here. Once we make those public, then the Secretary of State will then have the ability to go and do further investigations across all of Pennsylvania, because this is just 3 counties, right?
Yeah,
So hopefully, immediately we could get the Secretary of State to do investigations across all of Pennsylvania, look at all of their votes, look at all the systems that are used in counting those votes. And then we're also hoping that we can leverage the same action in other states that are using the same systems if it's tied to the systems. So it may require litigation. It may require just coordination with, individuals. I'm hoping that there'll be pressure on the government officials to further investigate at that point. That's the goal, at least.
sure. Well, since y'all have made the filing, what has the response been for the Election Truth Alliance? Have y'all seen a lot more support come your way? Has there been rumblings and the people of Pennsylvania skeptical about what y'all are doing? What's the vibe on the
We
ground?
Well, the people who were already a little concerned, they were just like, finally, there's someone doing a little bit about this. We've not heard anything official from anyone in like an elected position or such. I feel like really the only thing so far is this may not have grown as far yet. We're hoping to get into some media attention, some news.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, it may let us have this conversation a bit more thoroughly with other people. But so far, it's been actually surprisingly quiet, very quiet. So, as I said, this isn't the only thing we're going to make public as we go forward.
Okay.
There is more to kind of throw on the fire. But this lawsuit, as we said, we wanted a lawsuit that was just going to go in and get to the heart of the matter. We're not here to accuse anyone of anything. We're not here to, really start fights. We're here to get answers. And that's what's important. And, I can briefly run you through what some of the key pieces are in the lawsuit, some of the major impactful things. And then I'll show you maybe a graph or two, and then, we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, please do.
So, main things in the lawsuit, we do talk about those 3 counties pretty exclusively. Just for information, the counties of, and I'll pull it up here on my end at least and talk you through it, and then I'll show you some visuals. So, Cambria County and Allegheny County, 2 of the 3, they use election systems and software, ES&S, to scan their ballots, optical scanners. I believe they've also got um, scanners that count at the county level for mail-in ballots. So that's the major brand they use to vote or to count their votes. And then Erie County uses the Dominion voting systems. They're now called Liberty Vote, I believe, Liberty
Mhm.
Voting. I think we talked a little bit about that last time.
We did.
So this is important because these 3 counties use the 2 major brands that span at least 70% of the US, if not more. These are brands that are used all across the swing states, all across, the non-swing states, and they count our votes. And most people don't realize this, and I keep reiterating this. As of the 24 election, nearly 100% of every vote that was cast, paper ballot, mail-in, or ballot marking, or even just a computer touchscreen, almost 100% was counted by a machine. There is only a handful of places in the US that hand counted their results. And we've actually put out reports for them. One was Minnesota. There's a few places in Texas and some other states. So almost 100% of the votes are still counted by computers, by machines, by vote counting computers. And that's very important because as we're going further, we're highlighting that the data is telling us there's a problem. The means aren't really known yet, right? We don't truly know if there's something going on, how it's happening, but we can tell you that there are very common systems being used. So if in any way there is an impact, we'll know at the end of this lawsuit if things are successful, whether the discrepancies are true, and then we have a common thread to pull on from there. So that is important. Another piece, and this is laid out in the lawsuit, is there were software updates made to these major
Yep.
systems right before the election. There were two software updates from our knowledge that were made for ES&S. It was approved by ProV&V. That's the auditing entity or company that does the testing and says this is good, this isn't good. And then there was one update made for the Dominion systems as well. Now, this isn't abnormal. I mean, there's software updates for these systems, generally all the time, especially before they're going to be used. But what's interesting is we found that these software updates were labeled de minimis, meaning they were approved, they were allowed to be distributed, but the counties didn't need to recertify their machines or retest them or anything. And the counties by law are required, in Pennsylvania at least, I believe, are required by law to test their optical scanners before the election by running, test ballots through them, make sure they count correctly, make sure there's no weirdness or discrepancies or errors. And this software update came around the time that we bring up is they didn't need to retest when these updates were made. And some of the changes these software updates did make changed some configuration files from semi-static to dynamic. Well, cybersecurity wise, we raise that when you make changes to certain files, by making them dynamic, it makes them accessible or potentially changeable more easily. And we just flag, as we said, we're not accusing, you know, this of anything. We're just saying that if there was a ability to introduce vulnerabilities into the voting systems or the scanners, this could be an avenue, and we need to investigate this as we go forward. And we're not accusing anyone of anything. We're just saying these are some interesting data points. And as we go and we get into the statistics, there are serious red flags there. Or should I say, the election forensics. So
Yep.
we made all of that public, and that is in the lawsuit. And now we're actually going to talk about what happened on election day and the pieces that are in the lawsuit and what aren't. If you're familiar, I believe almost half of the counties in Pennsylvania had voting machine or vote counting machine errors or issues on election day, not including the bomb threats, by the way, the bomb threats that spanned all across Pennsylvania and other states as well. On election day, many counties in Pennsylvania had issues where their machines stopped working correctly, wouldn't count correctly. And one example of this is in Cambria County, which is focused on by our lawsuit, where all of their optical scanners and their ES&S, by the way, all of their scanners could not count ballots on election day, could not count. This was later, per the county, they said that there was an issue with the way the ballots were printed. So the scanners couldn't scan them. So they had to order new ballots. Those ballots came in the afternoon or the evening. I believe it was the afternoon of election day in Cambria County. And here's why we focus on them. They had, per their own statements, had to hand duplicate ballots. And then once they hand duplicated them, they had to feed them back to the scanners. And they did. And what's interesting is we've highlighted in our lawsuit the discrepancies between the numbers they are saying or potentially saying publicly they hand duplicated versus the end amount of votes being counted. And our lawsuit highlights this. There's supposed to be a chain of custody when you do these things, right? You're supposed to have some type of documentation saying how many ballots you did or moved or where. We've not been able to get any of the actual chain of custody documentation. So we don't know how many ballots were hand duplicated, officially speaking. We don't know what they truly did with them or, what actually happened. And that's one of the things we want to find out as we go forward in this lawsuit. The other thing is we do have some public statements that were made by certain individuals that worked for the county at the time. I believe there was an individual who made a public statement about saying where they weren't expecting to have to hand duplicate as many ballots as they did. They were expecting something along the lines of 35,000 ballots to hand duplicate and scan. They said their final count was closer to 65,000. which, as we said, that we're not flagging that that's weird. We're just saying that per their own public statements, they're saying that they hand duplicated around 65,000 ballots and then fed them into their scanners. Well, we have the final totals, we have the final reports, and we flagged this in our lawsuit where the election day votes. So this is the actual votes that were cast. We're only, per their documentation, per the results of the state, there is only around 55,661 votes that are being counted in Cambria County for election day. That is 9,000. That is a little over 9,000 fewer votes than duplicated ballots that they said they did. And we're flagging this because we're saying if you hand duplicated 65,000 ballots and scanned them, you're missing a almost 10,000 votes, 9,500 votes. And we're flagging this because this is one thing that we want to, figure out, because we've speculated, both through our election forensics, that if there is a issue with the way the votes are being counted, if there is a malicious compromise of the systems, as we'll get into the statistics and the data and the election forensics shows there's some weirdness going on, some anomalies going on, we're raising the flag of, well, where did those over 9,000 votes go? Were they potentially deleted when scanned through the machines? Were they not accounted for correctly? They need to be accounted for. Are they, and so we'll jump into the last piece. So those were the main pieces. There's a lot more in it. We do talk about precincts of over 100% turnout that we flagged per the state data. Those could just be clerical errors. That it always happens somewhere. But we pretty much say, hey, these should be investigated too, right? If these are places that are truly over 100%. We talk about a few other things from other discrepancies in other counties where they say they submitted X amount of mail-in votes versus Y amount. But generally speaking, the last piece we covered that's pretty important is the statistical or the election forensics analysis, the methodologies. So we actually have this in our lawsuit. I'm going to talk about this a little bit before I show you, and you've seen examples of this. We talked about it last time. It's not that complex. You just have to argue the methodologies are reasonable and sound and well supported.
Sure.
So this is not the first lawsuit that has ever used statistics, if you can call it statistics, in a election lawsuit. Are you familiar with the last time there were over 60 lawsuits that tried to use some form of statistics to argue election concerns?
Was this was this 2020?
This was right after 2020, yes.
Okay.
So we did kind of go back and we did look at all of the legal action that was taken then to figure out, where did they fail or where did they succeed in arguing with data in their lawsuits? There's problems. We found that they don't apply any of the statistical methods or election forensic methodologies that we use in their lawsuits. Their lawsuits mostly brought in maybe some experts or some, authority figures to testify that they felt something was wrong or the data looked weird to them, but they didn't apply any well-known methodologies except for one, and that I believe is Binford's Law, which has at this point been publicly discredited on a few occasions. It was actually publicly discredited by Dr. Mebane for, not being as amazing. It could be good to flag concerns, but it's not well established in being precise. And it's just, you're doing a digit test. You're saying, are any of these digits commonly reoccurring? And if they are, is this weird? So we don't use any methodologies that have been used before in the court of law. Our methodologies, as you know, are based on the work of election experts across the US and across the world. Some of the more notable ones you've seen I believe you've seen the heat maps. Those are made by a group of experts, Dr. Peter Klimek et al., and they have a paper out, and you can actually go and look at how they looked at Russia and some other elections. Some of our other methodology is based on the work of Roman Udod or Sergei Shvilkin. They have papers as well. And then finally, there's some correlation with Dr. Walter Mebane Jr. He's a professor of statistics. He has multiple public papers out, and he has an e-forensics model. So all of the stuff I'm about to show you, it is grounded in known methods of looking at elections. So we're not kind of coming up with this on our own. This isn't cutting edge for us. It has been out there for a while. It's just never been applied to the US before and actually successfully argued that there's problems or not. I mean, so two other pieces as well. It is, all of these methodologies have been applied to Russian elections, Bolivian elections, I believe, as well. And I think they actually annulled elections in some places based on some of the concerns that these methods raised. So I'm going to show you just a brief visual or two, and then we'll go from there to kind of close it out. So
Sounds good.
you may have seen some of this before. I'll throw it up on the screen here. I'll send you a copy as well if need be.
Okay.
Let's see. We'll see how this shows here. All right. How does this look on your end? It might be a little crazy.
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. So, as I said, this is the methodologies we're going to show you. We're just going to do scatter plots and turnout binning. I'm going to explain it very briefly. You've probably seen this. We're not going to have any heat maps this time, even though heat maps are my favorite. And these are just ways of showing the voting data. And I'll explain why and why it's significant here in a minute. But as I said, these were based off the work of these experts, Peter Klimek, Roman Udot, and others, and they've put these out in papers. And we can actually, we cite those papers on our website, and we put them very commonly in our work because they are the foundation of what we're doing when it comes to election forensics. And that's what this is. Election forensics is looking at both the data, looking at the places that were impacted in the abnormalities, looking at the demographic of voters. It's a whole package. So let me briefly explain how to read these again, and then I'll kind of stop and then let you thoughts and go from there. So on the left is a scatter plot. This is using the statewide data for Pennsylvania, published by the state, by the way. So this isn't from the counties. This is from the state after the counties gave them the data. And we have on the left a scatter plot and on the right a bar chart with binning, and I'll explain. Now, the scatter plots do seem to confuse people a little bit, so let me say a few things. First and foremost, I'll explain what turnout is and what vote share is, but there is 2 dots for every precinct, and this is every precinct in these counties. So we have mail-in for Erie County, Pennsylvania. This is one of the 3 counties. Now, mail-in isn't specifically in our lawsuit. I just use it as a visual example of what we argue should be normal. So there's a red dot and a blue dot for every precinct in this county. There is no time component, by the way. This is after all of the votes have been cast and counted. This is after all of the dust has settled. And what we're just looking at is we're looking at how did every precinct fall on this chart from precincts of low turnout versus precincts of high turnout. And then how did each candidate do across all of those precinct turnout thresholds? So turnout, if you're familiar, is just how many voters do I have that are registered to vote in a precinct, in this case, and then how many of them actually showed up and voted, or how many votes did I have cast? It's the same thing. So, for example, I have 100 registered voters, and I have half of them show up. That's 50% turnout. You shouldn't, you can get 100% turnout, but it should raise some red flags if you do. We've specifically flagged any precincts of 100% or above, and they're not in this graphic. And we've also removed any precincts that have less than 50 registered voters. Reason why is we're finding that generally 50 registered voters, well, below 50 registered voters, you may get a lot of noise because those could be really small areas. They could be really blue or really red. So 50 registered voters and above starts to pretty much get rid of a lot of the noise, and you get a very strong visual, and you can show any relationships or any characteristics. So on the left here, as we said, turnout is on the x-axis, the bottom. In this case, because it's mail-in, these precincts are a very small percentage of the total turnout. This is a third. Well, this is technically one of the 2 major voting types. You got election day and you got mail-in. You got provisional too. Provisional is super small. So at most, you're only getting a precinct or 2 that have 35% turnout. So when you add them all together, you get a solid amount of turnout. But this is just mail-in, so this is almost half or less. I think it's around 35% of the votes were mail-in in these counties, in Erie County at least. So now, as we said, we're looking at turnout, which is how many votes versus how many registered voters, and we're comparing it to vote share. Vote share is just what percentage of the votes did you get? If there's 100 voters and you got 50 votes, you got 50% of the votes. That's 50% of that's 50%, 50% vote share. So what's the so what of the scatter plot on the left? As I said, we've mapped both candidates. Red is Donald Trump, blue is Harris. And we're just showing how many, what's the average vote, or how much of the vote are they getting across all of the turnout across all these precincts. And we see that, and based on the methodologies of Roman Udot, Sergei Shvilkin, Peter Klimek, they argue this. They say there should be little to no relationship between turnout and vote share. What does that mean? That means that it doesn't matter after a certain point how many people turn up to vote or not. It doesn't matter if you had near 100% turnout or only 5% turnout. You shouldn't see any one candidate benefiting from more turnout consistently. If you do, if you do see that one candidate, when there's always more votes, that one candidate is always getting more of those votes, that is a red flag for potential vote manipulation. And it's seen in Russian elections, it's seen in Bolivian elections. It's pretty much, it's a common trend in vote manipulation, and it mirrors a lot of what has been flagged statistically before. Yeah, we shouldn't see it. So in this
Right.
case, I'll ask you this on the left. Do you, so we're looking at these lines. These are the trend lines, by the way. So
Yep.
you've got your precincts, and then we've got a trend line kind of showing that relationship between vote share versus turnout. Um, so in your opinion, looking at this, if a flat trend line means little to no relationship, do you see a strong relationship on the left at all for mail-in voting between any candidate? Does it look like any one candidate seems to get more votes in places of higher turnout, precincts of higher turnout, or does it look pretty flat, pretty consistent?
Yeah.
It does. And the way I describe this is generally you're going to get more of a straight line, or you're going to just get precincts that are going to span to the right. You'll stretch left or right. So we're not seeing any spikes. We're not seeing any places where I hit 30% turnout and then I just get more and more votes. On the
I mean,
right
you
is the
literally can't
same.
get any more flat almost than what
Oh
that
yeah,
is.
it almost is perfect. It almost can't get better than this. It's almost a near zero relationship. Now on the right, this is the same exact way of showing the data. It's just instead of dots, we have them grouped in 10%. So you have every precinct in the county that is from 0% to 10%. In this case, it's like 1 to 11%. So they're in groups of 10. And so we're just looking at, instead of a bunch of dots, let's just put them all in one basket, one bin, one group. And let's look at the trend then and visualize it a little cleaner for you. And that's the same thing we're doing. It's turnout versus vote share on the right. And this is mail in, just the same. So as we said, instead of a trend line, we're actually looking at how does each bin compare? And it's almost no relationship whatsoever. Both
Mhm.
candidates are almost flat. They almost get, and to summarize, both candidates average around the same percentage of votes across all thresholds of turnout. That is normal. That's what we should see. We see that Trump is averaging somewhere between 25, 30% to a little more across all turnout. And then Harris is, the opposite. She's getting closer to 70% or 65. And mail-in almost always goes Democrat, by the way. So
Yeah.
knowing this, and we'll speed run the rest, knowing this, and we'll make this final statement about this, across Pennsylvania and across many other states, when we look at mail-in voting, it doesn't, it on average does not show any of the anomalies or concerns that we're seeing in election day. It looks far more statistically normal. It looks exactly like what you would argue is a normal free and fair election. And per
Yep.
the experts, it's the type of effect that we should see if there isn't anything going on. So that is interesting that mail-in almost always looks more normal on occasion. Okay. With all that in mind, I'm going to let you walk me through this one. Here's Erie County with all the votes. So this is mail-in thrown back in, but also election day and whatever provisional is included. So on the left, same thing. Are we seeing, if you look at this, are both candidates showing a flat or almost no relationship between turnout and vote share, or what are we seeing here in
No,
your
that
own
that
words?
that I mean, you know, I know I said this in our last episode that we did, but you don't have to be an expert in elections or statistics to know that
It's
this is just
tough.
wrong because yeah, it's a tough word. Because as turnout goes up, you're seeing a higher vote share for Donald Trump, and in the same vein as turnout goes up, Kamala is getting less of the vote share. That looks so wrong.
Right. And to put it simply, and by the way, this is Dominion voting systems in Erie County. So this isn't even ES and S, this is Dominion. Yeah, we see a strong relationship between turnout and vote share for the Republican candidate because this is mostly a two-party system. Like we do have independents, we do have third parties, but there's so little of the vote that we do see that inverse relationship for them. And yeah, it's even more apparent on the right. And I like these on the right, the binning, because you actually see that it almost looks normal up until 60% turnout. You notice that, right? We see a little bit
Yeah.
of what mail-in looks like, where 30% to 50%, those precincts, you can see it on the left, it's just not as clear. We see that they're more of that straight line. We don't see any huge shifts or changes. But then as you get close to 60% and above, we see that flip, right? That X, that invert, where 60% and above, Trump then begins to get more votes in places of higher turnout, and it's consistent. And as you said, if this is, well, we'd call this, an anomaly. If this is vote manipulation, it's aggressive, and it pretty much is consistent across the precincts to the point where we flag that, one, this isn't normal voter behavior. It would be very difficult for voters to create this effect consistently across all of these precincts and across all of these counties. And I'll show you the other counties. It would be very difficult for the normal voters to do this. And the way it's done is the consistency points to it being almost a algorithm or a machine doing this, where you've pre-programmed something and it's doing it in such a way.
Let me
So
ask real quickly,
yeah,
what's the thought process behind it being like once you hit 60, 65, 70%, that's when you start seeing that
yeah.
inverse. Like, why is
Well,
it the higher turnout? Why, like, you would think that they would also, if it's algorithmic, put it on the
right.
lower end to
Well,
at least.
we don't know truly, but I'll ask you this question. Why would you not manipulate the results, or why would you not change votes? If this is, oh, by the way, so this mirrors textbook examples of potential vote stuffing, but we're actually in the opinion now that this may be a more advanced algorithm that's actually changing votes around, switching them at a turnout threshold level. So it looks like stuffing, but you're actually just changing votes. It could
Okay.
be both. We don't truly know until there's an actual hand count. I'll ask you this: why would you not want to manipulate votes where there were less votes cast?
I
If you're
mean,
thinking, if you're thinking from the sense of, well, one, manipulating elections is illegal, and we do audits. Many of these places do audits. They do a small audit, like a 2%. Why would you not want to manipulate votes in places where there are less votes to count or to
yeah.
check?
Yeah, that's valid. It seems like it would be easier to spot those irregularities or those
Yeah.
those change votes.
Yeah, it might be easier to catch. So, and it makes sense if you're going to change things, then you want to do it in a way you're not going to get caught. And if the audits are very small in scale, it does make sense that you're going to, focus on places where there are more votes, because it's harder to do a full audit of those. We don't do 100% audits in Pennsylvania, for example. It's 2% or so. So it would make sense. They also test the machines. So if for some reason this is a compromise of the machines and it's a pre-programmed algorithm, then during testing, you're only ever feeding in, I think most of the time they feed in 200, 300 ballots and check if they're weird. So if you are doing this in some way based on turnout or based on total votes cast, then you may be at high thresholds where it may not get caught during testing as well. As we said, we don't know.
Sure.
We could sit here and we could speculate all day, but we're just going to tell you what the data says. And then, we ask an investigation and a hand count, and then we can know exactly what's going on. If this is real, if this is a real effect, or if this is just, a unique situation. And this, these are real votes that have just, for some reason, created this effect in this one case across multiple counties. Okay, we'll run through the rest. Allegheny County, same concerns, same effects, same candidates benefiting at higher turnout. Um, Allegheny County was won by Harris, I believe. So that's what's important here. Is Allegheny is the second largest county by population in the state of Pennsylvania, by the way. Philadelphia is the largest. And we see that Harris still won this county. But if you look on the right as well, we still see that strong relationship between turnout and vote share benefiting the Republican candidate. But it doesn't look like it was enough to change the outcome of that county. How interesting.
Yeah.
How interesting. And the main reason is because majority of the votes seem to center, um, well, if you look here, well, they have a substantial amount of mail-in this county, by the way. This is all votes. And if this is vote manipulation and it is an algorithm, if you have more votes cast below 60% turnout, you could still win the county even if there is manipulation. So that's interesting. We're seeing certain effects. It brings up the question that if this is still an effect that's occurring, one thing that needs to be followed up on is we should look at races that have occurred after the election and look at how much turnout they had. Because if this effect is still occurring, if there's a malicious compromise of the systems and it's still turnout based, well, if you're never hitting 60% turnout on average in many of these intermediary elections or races because they're not presidential, I'm very curious what that's going to look like. So, nonetheless, I digress. This is Allegheny County, by the way, ES&S voting systems. And then here's the last one we'll show you, and then we'll talk about Pennsylvania and we'll close out. Here's Cambria County, as we said, the one that we, had. They had machine problems all over the county. Every precinct in the county couldn't count the ballots um, until they hand duplicated. And here's the effect we're seeing there. As you asked, important caveat here is that because of the size and the amount of people who turned out in Cambria County, we don't have many precincts that are below the 50% or so turnout threshold. So that's important, right? Allegheny
Yep.
County, you had precincts almost from the very beginning all the way up to 80, 90. In this case, we only have precincts of around 50% to 90% or so on average. There's some outliers. And so we see the effect aggressively strong here. And you actually see it, as you said, right from the beginning, if you will. Any questions here?
No questions there. It's just this is fascinating. Hearing about all of this is one
Mhm.
thing, but like seeing that data visualization is just fascinating.
Yep. And as we said, we can estimate this as well. But generally speaking, we know at this point that if this is vote manipulation, here's Pennsylvania as a whole. This may be enough to change the outcome of the presidential election if this is vote manipulation.
Yeah.
And we put a little disclaimer at the bottom here. So out of the, I believe, 67 counties in the state, 38 of them use ES&S, 14 of them use Dominion, but we're seeing the effect across both. So even the system, like they're different models or different systems, but any place, any of these counties, all of the data shows the same effect. So we want to, figure out, is it a compromise of the systems? Is it not? We need to know by looking at the hand counts, how do they compare to the digital results? And on the left, because there's so much data, it's very hard to see the effect, but the same effect is apparent across all of Pennsylvania, all of the counties of Pennsylvania, all of the precincts in Pennsylvania. And on the right, you see it here where it's very clear. And this is a different type of binning. So instead of 10%, we're actually binning it by the total amount of votes in each group. This is a clever way of doing it because if for some reason some of these places have wildly different amounts in each of the bin, you could skew the data. So in this case, we're just saying let's divide every vote up, or let's divide the total votes up by around 700,000 votes and then group them that way. So we have from 0 to 65%. And this is what's important is that's two thresholds. And you'll notice where, if you look at how many bins there are from 65% above, where is a majority of these votes falling, right? So you only have two bins that fall below the 70%. So that's 700,000 for 0 to 65, and then 65 to 72%, that's another 700,000. And then from the right, a vast majority of the votes that were cast in Pennsylvania for all the vote types, they're above that 72% precinct turnout threshold. That's important because I'll explain why. If this is vote manipulation, the vote manipulation isn't changing the outcome from 0 to 72% turnout. From 72% turnout and above, all of the precincts of all the votes in all of the precincts of 72% and above turnout, if manipulated, that is a substantial amount of the presidential votes. And if you're changing that, you're changing over a majority of the votes. And that's important because if this is vote manipulation and you were to invert that, that is a substantial amount of the votes that could have been shifted around. And as you can see, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so bins that are above that 70-ish percent, 72% turnout threshold. That is, to put it plainly, I can't do math. I'm not going to do math live because that's a horrible thing to do.
Yep.
But that
Yep.
is a ridiculous amount of the votes that are above that threshold. And it's really interesting the way, if the data is falling this way, we want to investigate all of those places that have higher turnout. Okay, so I think we've beaten this enough. That is the visual of the data here, and I will cease sharing. And yeah,
You
so all you.
you've done all of this work. You have poured so
Well,
much.
let me jump in here. It's not just me
Well,
in a
you and your
trench coat.
yep,
The
yep.
Election Truth Alliance, our volunteers, other executive directors, our members are. It's been a it's been probably one of the largest group projects of my life, to be honest. It has been a year now, almost a year since the election. It's been over a year, I believe, for many. And we've been pretty much working for a year. The ETA didn't form fully until a little after the election, but it has been a year of my life looking at elections, looking at data, and working with other amazing volunteers and experts in their own fields to figure out what is going on here.
Well, you all, let me correct myself, you all at the Election Truth Alliance have done so much amazing work over the past year, and it almost feels so bulletproof. Like I just I fail to see a place where someone can poke a hole in any of the arguments and any of the data that you've presented. Why in this lawsuit not go all the way in your request to recount the entire election, say for Pennsylvania? Why just ask for a hand count and just like stop there? Why not go all the way?
Yeah, good question. So mainly it comes down to what are we trying to do? And I think the hard part is because of election law, there's no solid ground on decertifying or changing outcomes of elections. Every lawsuit that has ever tried to do that generally doesn't go well. And that's why, as we said, we care more about knowing if there's problems because that's kind of the first step is if there is problems, they need to be investigated, they need to be looked at. Um, and once those problems are actually proven, and if there is problems, they're proven. If there isn't problems, we can go sleep safely. That I think that's the first step. And everyone wants to, as you said, kind of be like, well, let's go out guns blazing. But the problem is, um, to us, the concern seems solid, but in the court of law or in the court of public opinion at large, it may not be so.
Hmm.
So the first step is showing, and in this lawsuit, we did it this way. We said, hey, we just want to know if there's problems. We're not accusing anyone of anything. We just want to go and look in these three counties to start. And that's important because there is cost associated with this. Hand counting does cost time and money. So Pennsylvania as a whole to hand count would be a huge task. It would cost a lot of time and money. To do three counties to start, some of the smaller counties, well, Allegheny's the second largest, but some of just three counties I think it makes it more approachable to do the work, and then we can go from there. And if there are problems, we have a court and a legal recognized problem. And I think that's important. Is if it's recognized in the court of law that there's a problem and there's a problem found, there's a lot more we can do with it than just talking about it, which is what we've done up to this point.
Sure.
So I think
With
that's
the
important.
with the midterms being now, I believe, a little less than a year away,
Less than a
what
year, yeah.
what implications does this lawsuit have for how those midterms are conducted? Does it have any implications? Do you hope it does?
I hope it does. I hope that if there is a problem with the way our votes are being counted in Pennsylvania and maybe across the US, I hope that this lawsuit will be the first that does two things. One is it sets a precedent that you could use these election forensic methodologies in the court of law to support problems or out of the court of law. That's the main thing is we should be able in the midterms, right? We get to the midterms, we run the data for the midterms. We should be able to then go to the states and the reps and the government and say, hey, the data and the methodologies say that the midterm elections look strange. We need to go and we need to investigate. And they do. And so that's the thing is we're trying to set a precedent that if the methodologies we're using can detect anomalies in voting, that it should be used to detect anomalies in voting going forward. That's
Sure.
important because that opens the door for protecting not just the midterms, but every election after that at small scale or large scale. Because there has never been before this a way to look at elections using the voting data itself. There's been no methodologies to actually say, is this abnormal or normal? And that's a huge step forward, I think, because it does make us, as we said, people have accused us of saying, well, you don't want people to vote or you don't want anyone to ever trust the outcome of an election again. Well, I said, no, actually, I want people to show up and I want their vote to be counted and counted correctly. And I want to know that when we do these methodologies, that it shows a free
Sure.
and fair election going forward. And that's the goal. So the lawsuit, we don't know timeline wise. We don't know what the outcome of the election or the lawsuit will be. But what we do know is that if we're going to kind of open this can of worms, now's the time to do it.
Sure.
We could have done it earlier, but it took so much effort and work to get to this point. And we have a year to, work through the courts. And I'm less worried about the, destruction of the ballots, which is, 22 months, I believe, by federal laws, how long they retain the ballots. So I do know that, we could ask to keep those ballots longer during the lawsuit. I think now is probably a good time because we have enough time to kind of fight this fight. And then from there, depending on where we fall, the midterms may be, around the same time. Um, and it'll be interesting, I think. We're going to make more things public as we go. Um, we're going to not only, we have other pending legal action that will be taken, but also we've really aggressively been reaching out to other state officials and trying to get them to do investigations without legal action required. So we'll see. We have a year to keep fighting this fight. I think we are slowly but surely making it, grinding away. And I hope very sincerely that if there is a problem with our elections, it is going to be public and it is going to be acted upon well before the midterms, um, because that's our goal at this point.
Well, let me ask before we wrap. You just said that you've reached out, or ETA's reached out to state officials. What has their responses been?
Yeah, generally speaking, the response at the high levels is almost always the same response we got from Pennsylvania, which is they certified their machines and they did audits. Those are the two things that we almost always get as an immediate response. It's actually getting a little easier to approach that because we now have, a lawsuit that pretty much is like, well, here are ways that you could defeat such measures. And I think that's important because we're not accusing the states or the counties of anything. That's what's
Yeah.
important is we're saying that if there is a malicious third party that's trying to mess with our systems and our elections, they could have defeated the processes we have by working around them, right? They know how you're going to audit, they know how you're going to certify and test your machines. They may potentially be able to defeat that because they know how you're going to do it. And you could do everything right and it still potentially happen. And that's why we want these investigations. And we're not accusing, the counties of anything
Yeah.
because of
I
that.
think that I think that's a very valid point to make because you're not accusing county officials, you're not accusing local or state officials of anything because they might not have been aware of it. And this is a learning process for everyone. And I feel like the way y'all are approaching it is perfect. I'm grateful for the work that y'all are doing. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation as the lawsuit moves forward and as y'all release more information and move forward with the pending lawsuits that y'all have in progress. I look forward to all of that work. And Nathan, I thank you so much for your time again today. And I know everyone on He's Not Wrong will be looking forward to hearing from you soon.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Hopefully, I didn't put too many people to sleep. So next time, we'll have some more fun stuff to talk through.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nathan.
Thank you.